Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. Can you hear me?
Got it.
So thank you so much for meeting with us. And apparently, as late as this is for you, it's not always late enough given your lively social life.
Yeah, it's 10 p.m. here in Norway.
It's amazing how much of my schedule has been disrupted this last 2 weeks by people going to see James Bond. That's become like the most common excuse.
Yep, that was good. I took 3 of my 4 sons with me, an old family tradition. The boys
that's nice.
Night out.
Yeah, I'm gonna do I'm scheduling a guy's day out with my son to see the Eternals, and probably my father-in-law will come with us as well. We went to see Chang-Chi while the women all went to see the Paw Patrol movie. So it was a good division of labor. All right, so Ernest will be joining us shortly, but since he and I went over stuff last time, I can kind of catch you up to speed on where we're at.
And I did look at the video of it, most of it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So we can move from the rich video to the simple text. And so the focus is these 2 documents that I'm proposing as sort of a way to define and represent datocratic decisions. Again, trying to come up with sort of the simplest possible thing that captures the values and principles that we're concerned about. And so one is the format, sort of defining the decisions, and then the second is sort of defining the principles and how we measure them. And so the decision part, I think, is fairly mundane. It just has to be defined, but I don't think there's anything terribly interesting or confidential or controversial around it. Other than the fact that we need to document things. We should have a unique number so we can keep track of them. I have to geek out on this because I know you care a lot about unique identifiers. I'm always wrestling with, like, when I create a numbered thing, I want to be able to do an ASCII sort, but I don't want to like have like 4 zeros or too many zeros in front, or then not enough and it messes it up. And I realized, oh, I can use a letter, and each letter I just double the number of digits. And so we have A1, B01, C001. And that solves my problem, and I'm not going to run out of digits or letters anytime soon. So that.
Hi, Tom. Hi, Ernie. Sorry, I'm late.
Hello, Ernest.
Hi.
And I had a little kerfuffle with Ernest about ASCII doc because he still wanted to use pages, but he agreed to live with this for now.
Yeah, it wasn't like, it's like, what you said.
Yeah, and then the more interesting one is using this as our first cut at a minimal set of datocratic principles. And, these 4 principles and 2 questions. And like, this is, I'm sure we will find all sorts of things we've missed and need to fill in, but this feels like a small enough set to start with.
Okay. I need to get a copy of it and sit alone with it and work through it, which I haven't done yet. This is far more than I recall from the video I just looked at too.
Oh, okay. So maybe we only got there at the end of it. So I apologize.
I can comment on isolated things, but I've got to sit alone with the text and work on it and feed it back at some point.
Yeah, that's great. Now, have you used GitHub? Are you familiar with their pull request process?
GitHub?
Yes.
No, I've avoided it. I'm still hoping to avoid. Why'd I?
Okay, that's fine. So you can take notes in whatever format you want.
Yeah.
The tool includes a way for you to make comments sort of inline, so we can actually like track issues and resolve them, but we don't need that at this stage. So, I'm happy to try. If you're willing to let me store it here, I'm happy to let you edit and hack on these things in whatever tool of your choice. On the other hand, since we have time, if you have any superficial thoughts you feel comfortable sharing, I'm happy to hear them now. If you want
I have some high-level thoughts. Maybe this is the right time to share them. So you use the and I appreciate you're trying to keep it simple and straightforward, and that's good. Problems to be solved. I have what I do is I set what I call value objectives. Okay. And the value objective is the problem to be solved. So what that means is every one of those things is some kind of a thing you would value solving the problem, and it has a name. But what I do every time to force myself and others to think very deeply about it is I quantify it. I define a scale of measure for it, everything. Okay. And you will have seen that in things you scan through essays. So for me, a sentence is a beginning, but in order to really get a clear idea out there that cannot be misunderstood, I have to go through a process of parsing it, analyzing it, quantifying it, that kind of thing. Okay, and I will do that. You guys may be new to that discipline. In writing the Datocracy book, there's a lot of stuff like that floating around there. It's based on my planning language. Okay, so my big comment is it's okay with a sentence there, but I rarely find it satisfactory to define a problem with a sentence. I find there's always too much fluff in the English words floating around. And then by having a discipline of structuring it, and I haven't defined what I mean by that to you yet, and quantifying it, we should get extreme clarity about what we agree or disagree about. In other words, going for clarity first, and then possibly an agreement. But if you have things that have 10 words in them, all of which are ambiguous, and people read different things into them, then agreeing really is a non-starter discipline, because you're agreeing to your misinterpretation and you're not even sure what you've misinterpreted. Okay, so this is part of my discipline, and I will help us through this, promise.
I think that's excellent, and that's exactly the kind of feedback I'm looking for.
Okay.
Like, I still think there is,
yeah, that's what I call your value objectives. That's great. But by the way, I got a similar comment on the we should, and I remind you, I haven't thoroughly read through and thought through these things, but I take we should as a set of things to do, and these things to do are possibly what I would also call strategies. Okay, they could also be procedural things that really aren't strategies. But the thing about a strategy. The definition, my definition is, a strategy is something that you do in order to solve your problem, in order to reach your goals for your values, right? So there's a criteria here. If I were to judge any of those sentences there, I've got to ask myself the question, if I do this first line there, to what degree would I start moving towards any of my valued objectives? Right? If the answer is not at all, it's just a thing you have to get out of the way, then I say, well, that's not a strategy. It's some kind of an action item, keep the bureaucracy running, and it may be a good idea to do it. But it's the important thing we have to come up with are the major strategies. For example, even something as simple as building an app to pilot this is at the level of starting out is a major strategy. It might satisfy an objective called build credibility and interest into the system as an objective, right? So we've got to match up the strategies, have to be things that when you do them, it is arguable that you will start moving towards your multiple objectives. That's another meta comment. Something that everybody does, even quite intelligent, well-educated people like you, and I haven't analyzed it, but I'm predicting we'll find it, is that when they do write objectives, they often build in the strategy and the objective. We're gonna get great security by doing X, and then the doing X is a strategy, but it's built into the security objective. Okay, the world of published objectives and ones I've seen is ripe with that stuff. Like every single objective seems to have a statement about the proposed strategy for getting there. And that's logically wrong. You have to separate the ends and the means very clearly. You have to finally clarify and agree on the ends, the objectives. And then and only then can you start throwing out strategies and saying, will they move us towards our goals? So this is the discipline I call language or planning language. But as simple as that discipline is and logical, most people haven't learned it. So you find things, my favorite example is the United Nations Sustainability Goals.
Right.
You know, and I've written a book called Sustainability Planning about it, which is free for anybody. You can put it on your website or whatever. And it is ripe with this confusion of ends and means and unclear ends. So you can't even judge whether the means is a good means. This is United Nations trying to solve one of the biggest set of problems in the world, end hunger, you know, education for everybody and stuff like that. So when it gets that bad at that level, we know the world is in a pretty bad place regarding clear thinking about planning.
Right, and I think what's interesting to me is like the way the categories that help me make sense of this in my head is those are aspirational statements, but they are not a plan. They're not even plannable.
Okay.
And I think that that's a good way to think about this is turning a, like, it's useful to have an aspiration, but what I think the interesting point is that, like, it's useful to have that as a starting point for, but I think the interesting is that instead of going from that aspirational statement to implementation, is you need to turn that aspiration into a concrete planning document or planning requirements, and only then can you actually implement.
Yeah, and I would,
sorry, go ahead, Ernest.
I would say even that you have to go at the lowest level. You have to go from the top to bottom and from bottom to top. So you have an aspirational goal, and then the middle people convert that into some sort of, like I said, early plan. But then you have to give that to the people in the front lines, because you know they see what they know what the problem is. They see they have direct contact with the people or things that are part of the problem, and they can come up with solutions for their own area, the local area. Then you mix all those, you bubble them up so that the middle people see, oh yeah, we need to, the reality is this, we thought it was that, but we have to adapt. So you have to, it can't be just top down, it cannot be just either bottom up, it has to be both.
I agree with you, Ernest. I agree with you. So I was going to reply to first Ernie, but simultaneously I can tackle what you remarked on, Ernest. I've written a book called Vision Engineering, which I can give free to anybody, right? So this literally takes some famous visions from some well-known companies. One of them called Merck is in the news a lot because of the vaccines these days. Okay, and I take their visions and I show how to quantify and clarify them. Okay, so now I agree. You have to start with a great long-term idea. Let's call it the vision. So I do that. Okay, but I even take those visions and convert them into exceptionally clear, quantified ideas. And I show how to do it in practice with real, well-known visions in the business world in my engineering book, which everybody copy of. Okay, number one. Number two, when you get down to a more detailed level, you're doing objectives for our work in the next 2 or 3 years. No long-term vision there. You know, like I want to have a secure system, to take a very simple example. What I do is I work from a thing I call the ambition level. So there might be a statement said, we've got to have a very secure system. And that's not a great vision or anything like that. That's just a necessity we have to acknowledge and deal with. But I put that in what I call an ambition level statement. And I pin down who said it. You know, the boss, for example, or the law, whatever, okay? And then I take that ambition level and do the same thing as I do with the visions, because it is sort of a short-term, low-level vision. And I then quantify it. I define a scale of measure. I define how bad we are at the moment, and I define how good we want to be in the short-term, medium-term, and long-term, okay? So same process. In other words, I have two fluffy things, visions and ambition levels. I still clarify, and quantify them, and I believe that is absolutely necessary for people to cooperate together and discuss and maybe finally agree.
Mm-hmm.
Good. So let me try and capture that as a starting point, and then if we have time, I wouldn't mind just trying to start digging into the process. And again, I realize you definitely need time to work through this on your own, but given that we're still trying to wrap our heads around this, the more concrete examples of us doing it, useful for us and our legions of
I can
listeners.
do that. I do it at drop of a hat.
All right. So let me just first try and capture what you said, and then we'll try and actually do it.
Okay.
So one is clearly specifying numerically measurable objectives, which we then reach agreement on, that will materially improve
Progress towards the objectives.
which will create progress towards objectives.
Those objectives, correct? Yeah. But by the way, I said I want to make something a little bit more explicit, maybe even a line there. I told you I take the strategies and I ask, how far does it move me towards my objectives?
Mm-hmm.
But I have a special way of doing that, which is also numeric. I estimate for each strategy the percentage that it moves me towards my goal. So if a strategy is perfect, that is, it will get me to my goal on time, right? I give it 100%. If my strategy just moves me a trivial amount, I'll give it a number small, like 1%. In other words, yeah, it moves me forward, but a lot of people argue it moves us forward, therefore we shall do it. I said, not if it moves you forward only 1%, and you've got some bigger strategies out there you should be looking at. That's not good enough. So I feel it's very important to quantify what I call the impact of strategies on our objectives and on our limited budgeted resources. This is called an impact estimation process, and I've written a lot about it.
So to do that, you will have to have the objectives planned out very concretely so that you know that this strategy, and let me put a parenthesis, strategy, I have viewed, since my days in the Army and business, the short definition is strategy is your long-term planning and tactics are your short-term objectives. So normally the CEOs or whatever, they set the strategy and middle management would do the tactics, the lower people. They are, again, closer to the actual work. In this case, I don't know if we are kind of confusing that definition of strategy. How do you define strategy? Because that's okay. Important.
I agree with you. We need to define. By the way, I did give you a definition. When you hear my definition, you realize I did it. But let me say at a higher level. For the planning language, I have a glossary freely available on the web.
Yeah.
Everybody can have the link to it, of about 700 concepts like strategy, and I define them very rigorously. Okay. So any one of these planning terms you can throw at me, like objective or strategy or goal or target, I have a formal definition which has been stable for at least 2 decades, if not more. Okay, and it's good. So my formal definition is it's in my glossary. Would you like to argue with my glossary? Okay, and you can do that. Maybe my definition isn't that good, but I've survived almost all attacks for 20 years because they're good. Okay, now let me give you rough informal definition without looking at my glossary, but this is something we can make available for anybody and everybody who wants it. If you Googled Tom Guild language glossary, you'd probably get the link to it. Now, what is a strategy? uh, I like the simple terms ends and means. Ends is where you're going, okay, and means is how you're going to get there, right? Right. Now, there are many synonyms for ends, like target, goal, objective, right? And there are many synonyms for means, like strategies, tactics, which you mentioned, solutions, designs, architectures, nice shit to do. Okay. But it doesn't matter what you call them. They have exactly the same nature. One of them is how good things are going to be in the glorious future, short or long term, doesn't matter. You have different deadlines. Short deadlines is short term. 100 years from now is long term. Okay? So, and then the strategies, it doesn't matter what you call them. Their essential nature is you do them in order to move forward towards your goals. And they either do move forward or they don't. If they don't, they're worthless. If they do, they have some use. If they move you forward a lot at a very low cost, I call them efficient strategies. That is, cost-effective strategies. And what we're looking for are not just some strategies that somehow work. We're actually looking for cost-effective strategies because we have limited resources, time, people, money, stuff, right? And we can't just do a strategy because it's nice or effective if it costs more time, money, and people than we have. Okay, we've got to not only look for effective strategies, we have to look for cost-effective strategies. In other words, the cheapest way to do the same thing. And that's something engineers call design to cost, by the way. Throw in a little engineering term, which is kind of fun here. You put your mind to it, it's amazing how you can reduce costs by just asking the question, isn't there a cheaper way of doing exactly the same thing? A lot of people run in with a strategy because it works, and they don't even discuss the costs. And then they run over the deadline, over the budget, and say, yeah, it was a complex system. Okay. And that's just bad architecture, bad design to cost, bad engineering, foolish management. I've written a lot about this too, so I can point you to the appropriate places. I've even got a thing called dynamic design to cost, which is you do things stepwise. Any large long-term thing has to be done stepwise anyway. And then you measure at each step how it's doing with cost and value. And if you get bad answers, you rethink your architecture or design. IBM did this in a method called the clean room method, and had amazing success in their projects, like always under budget and on deadline. For NASA and Department of Defense projects at the highest complexity, always. And this is when they're the lowest bidder. Okay, so this method of dynamic design to cost, I call it, but IBM called it the clean room method. And there's literature on this from like IBM Systems Journal and places. You'll find it in my works. This is one of the smartest ways of delivering complex systems. And make no mistake about it, that's sort of what we're thinking of doing. Delivering a very complex system to a very complex world.
Hopefully a minimally complex system to start with, and then we can scale it up to something
more complicated. 100% with you, Ernie.
Yeah.
100%.
But yes, and I really what you want is a complex adaptive system, right? Something that will actually learn.
Yes, that's the only way to tackle really complex systems, is to be incredibly adaptive. But for example, adaptive means you have to have good feedback, and good feedback means you have to have quantitative feedback. And the way most people plan is without quantification. They're just using bullshit words all over the place. The UN sustainability goals is a good example of doing that in public without blushing.
So
okay.
let me sorry. Okay, go ahead, Ernest.
Just to get my head clear in the two terms that we talked about. To use strategy and tactics are synonyms, largely synonyms, things that get you.
Well, put it this way, they're of the same nature. They are something you do in order to move towards your goals. Now, when people, for example, take another thing. Strategy is a management word. Management loves to talk about strategic thinking and strategies.
Mhm.
They don't really talk a lot about tactics. The military people do, right? So some of these are just a word that's been adopted by a culture. And if you're working for military management, I've done a lot of Department of Defense work myself, then you can talk tactics and strategies and sort of I'm saying, but the moment you bring in tactics to a management meeting, it sounds a little bit alien. You know, they can easily stomach that, you know, strategies and even systems architecture, but tactics is alien to management culture.
Yeah, but so well, the synonym will be
There are
short-term strategies. You know, to say like you have a set of goals. You have short-term goals.
This is your choice. If you say, when I Ernest, use the word tactic, I'm thinking of a short-term strategy. That's okay. But write it down somewhere like I do and say, what I've done with my language glossary, I've said, look, I can't control how the world uses words, but I can control how I use them. So I've written my glossary. And if you're reading one of my books or listening to me and you want to know exactly what I'm saying, you have to look at my glossary. There's no other way to do it. No other way to do it. Okay. And that doesn't mean I'm imposing words on you. You know, you can have your own private glossary. We all three could have different glossaries, but when we listen to each other, I've got to know how you're using that word. I've got to know it. I've got to be able to look it up. Okay. Yeah. Now, if we're working as a team together, which we are right now, I think we have to try to operate from a common glossary of some kind, rather than Ernest's glossary, Ernie's glossary, and Tom's glossary, because that's going to cause confusion immediately, and you know we're going to grow the ranks. So there's got to be a common idea of what things mean in, let's call it the Datocracy culture. And by the way, in the Datocracy book, you'll find me defining a great many new terms for Datocracy. So you'll see me working on understanding, innocent looking terms, but when you look at my definition, you're going to get a surprise. It's not the way you would have defined it. Okay. But you hopefully you'll say, arguably Tom's definition is better because he's used more time thinking about it. And I didn't really think so much. Okay. But the moment you don't have an agreed glossary, you get Babel's Tower, you get confusion, everybody has an opinion. And by the way, one way to start a war is to start arguing about terminology. Okay. It is the essence of it. This way, if we all had exactly the same definition and used 3 different words, let's call them synonyms, no problem. But if you have 3 different definitions and you're using the same word, you have a problem, Houston.
Actually, I have the first problem sometimes where we'll be arguing about which word to use and only later realize we actually mean the same concepts. We didn't need to argue.
Yeah. Now, by the way, I notice I acknowledge synonyms.
Yeah.
I don't care if the military guy says tactics and my management friend says strategies and my IT friend says systems architecture. I don't care as long as I know it's exactly the same thing they're talking about.
This is where
their terminology.
Yeah, this is where the concept of context is important, because we have a different context from your work at IBM and Intel, in that we are just starting from scratch, right? So we need to define these little
our terms.
We have to define our own concepts, which are not the same as the concepts that you have used. So that's why we have to indeed create the Tom, Ernie, and Ernest while we plan.
Datocracy. Yeah. Okay.
So, but by the way, I had one guiding principle. I didn't just define it any which way that suited my fancy. I did look at dictionaries and said, can I use this or must I do something different because it's misleading? Okay.
Exactly. That's what I do. Yes.
So I stick to the standards that are, if they're good enough. Unfortunately, they're not very good in many cases.
Correct. And sometimes people just use them wrong. So you have to
Yeah.
say, you have to
Well,
acknowledge that
let's not use that word wrong. They use them differently,
differently. Yeah.
and that's the problem.
Which can sometimes be wrong, but yeah, differently. Yes.
No, but I was picking on the word wrong because it's offensive to people you're talking about. You know,
Well, you know, in
he's
some ways,
wrong.
another way to
Yeah.
think
And I'm
about
right.
this is
Yeah.
that we're basically creating culture. We're creating a little micro culture which uses certain words to mean certain things.
Yeah.
And that allows us to think clearly about things and solve certain
Good.
problems that other people aren't able to.
Great. Exactly. Agreed.
All right, so let me see if I have captured your syntax, your terminology in a way that is defines the problem to be solved, if you will. So these are the things that, like any decision we present, any document should have these components. So I want to have at least some concept of a scope of the problem, and then we can decide whether they get merged together when we actually work it out.
Yep. Yep.
But then, you know, refine those problems into numerically measurable objectives, which we then reach agreement on, which we agree on. Precise. Identify strategies that create progress toward those objectives, and then estimate impact of strategies towards completing those objectives versus their expected resource cost.
Yep. You got it. That's correct.
Okay. So is that sufficient? Is there anything else that like you feel is like needed for a document in order to
that's more than good enough to get going and even experiment in detail to see how it looks.
Okay.
You got the framework there. Framework's correct.
Okay, now here's the interesting question. How can we pick, so this is I'm gonna just keep labeling this problem to be solved until we decide where it goes. This is kind of like a high level, yeah, I'm not sure where these are. By the way, I think you caught this, right? The reason I anchored on the words problems to be solved and we should is that's what our friends over at the Forward Party are using to describe their platform. And it's not perfect, but it's like, at least they understand that you need to separate the thing you're trying to solve from the way you're trying to solve it, which is a huge step forward in political debate as far as I'm concerned. So I feel let's adopt their terminology for now and see if we can work with it.
I can live with that.
Yeah.
I can live with that.
And I want to also emphasize another point. We either have to do it, or maybe we can not do it. So that's what should did. Well, that's what should says. Should is not doesn't say we must do it. So there are some things that we must do, and when the word must applies, we should use the we must use the word must and avoid the word should, because should is ambiguous. It was, oh, you said you should do it, not that I must do it. You know,
should is extreme. In fact, you know that the word should is banned from RFCs because you have to either say may or must.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
By the way,
it may be a flawed word, and we'll revise it later. But let's see.
By the way,
yeah,
I reject the use of all of those terms because they lead to all kinds of problems, which I won't get into now. But I studiously avoid those conventional words. You know, we should, we must, may. I've got better, clearer ways of saying the same thing.
Example.
Okay, that's number one. Yeah. But I want to make one more remark, and then I'll give you examples if you like it. By the way, I'm a great fan. If you're dealing with a culture which you want to be friends with, then acknowledging their culture and don't make them feel uncomfortable with, you know, you say, I insist that you change your terminology to this. Okay. That's just alienating them before you get started. There may come a time when you have to break with their tradition, but you know, gently, and so they're ready for it. Okay, so that's good. Acknowledge other people's culture and say we're listening to you. I do a lot of that. Okay. Now, so Ernest, you said example. Okay, challenge me with one of those words and give me maybe a sentence with it, and I'll tell you roughly what I do with these things.
So like the thing about this way is that let's pick this point here. I want to know two things. One is
the one starting with refine those problems.
Yeah, right. Yeah, sorry.
Okay. The blinker was just under. I wasn't sure which line you were. Okay, yeah.
Okay, so I'm thinking there's two things I want to know. One is I want to actually, this is the same thing, right? I was like that there does not in itself, it's not self-referential. That sentence doesn't seem to be actually qualify as a numerically measurable objective. So I'm wondering if we could just walk through how to convert that into one and what that would look like.
Okay, now, number one, I'm not going to put things into quantifiable objectives if they are not objectives. If they are strategies, I'm not going to do it. So I have to analyze this and ask myself, is it an objective or a strategy? So let me read it. Refine those problems into numerically measurable objectives, which we agree on. Okay, now that is a task or process. It could be a strategy, but the first part of the sentence is not an objective.
Ah, interesting. So these might be strategies for higher level objectives.
But look at the last part of it. Look at the last part, which we agree on. That's a possible objective. Let's call it the agreement objective.
Okay. I just realized I'm doing three different. Okay, sorry. Just
okay. Well, let me do a little bit more here.
Yeah.
Let's call it. I put a tag on it, and I'll call it. It looks to me like the whole point here is to get something you can agree on. So that's the objective, to get agreement. Now, I'm now going to write an ambition level, which will be do something with these problems so that they are so clear that people can understand them and begin to agree to them. That's my ambition level, right? Now, I'm not finished, and I've not told you where we're going yet. I've got a tag agreement. I've got an ambition level, which is now. Notice I didn't yet even say define these problems into numerically measurable objectives. Okay, now I'll put a scale of measure on it. The probability, say the percentage of statements that we get agreement on from a given group within a given time frame. That's a scale of measure. And let's just say, for the sake of argument, we've analyzed what's happening now, and we're only getting 10% buy-in. And we want a much higher level of buy-in. Let's call it our goal level, 95%. Now we know what we want in the future, a degree of agreement. Now we can say, how am I going to get there? And somebody says, that idea that was floating around there about quantifying it? That might be a good strategy for making it clear and getting agreement. And then somebody says, how effective will that be in getting us to 95%? And I said, somewhere between 50 and 70%, somewhere in that area. It's a big number, but it's not the complete solution. I just did it now. I took that sentence, I parsed it into ends and means. I established the agreement was in the ends area, that the quantification was in the means area. I developed a scale of measure, and I developed two critical points on the scale: the status, where we are now, and the goal, where we want to go, with numbers. And then I have a clear idea of what I have to do. So now I can bring in ideas of how to do it, my strategies, and say, how powerful do I think they will be? And if I get enough powerful stuff, I start doing them. I start doing stuff, the next Monday, next week. I don't wait for years and see how they work. So now I'm finished, Ernie. I'm sorry, but I had to get through that spiel there.
No, I appreciate that. It was really useful. Yeah, I think the reason my brain is kind of stuck is that there's like different levels, and I'm probably mixing them, which is making this harder than necessary. So I need to kind of refactor my thinking so that.
Right. I know I did it kind of fast, and I can slow it down. By the way, everything I said is in many of my books very systematically built up. Okay, so it's all written down. Yeah. It's standard practice.
Yeah, so the thing that I think that makes this tricky, and maybe this is unnecessarily confusing myself, which I sometimes do, is that there's like what we want the people when they're using this process to do. There's what we, then there's what we want people to do. There's the way we want to describe to them how they should do this. And then there is this document, which is sort of laying that all out. And so I'm starting to get stuck. So I think one would be interesting to think about, and this is where we also get weird because the principles start coming into the and maybe this is a flaw in the way I factored. Like I was thinking about like just defining the document format in one place and then the document content and purpose. And I realized that there's sort of like the things you're talking about are largely these things that I was calling principles over here. And I realized that like the way I'm splitting this up is probably maybe useful to my brain is sort of swirling a bit trying to figure out the right way to decouple. Like I have like mechanical rules that I care about for just specifying the structure of things. And then there's the like, saying that, you will use Microsoft Word and documents are 12-point font. That's just really just formatting issues. And then there's content rules, like this document, like a pitch deck. It should have an introduction. It should have an agenda. It should have next steps. And I think I'm trying to, and I realized that the way this is set up is that really the goals that we want to achieve drive the required sections in the document. And so maybe I should take a step back and, it's all version control. We can start over and wipe it out and start over again. Is that, okay, so let me start with these two statements here. I feel like this problem to be solved is good in that it gives sort of a scope for what we're trying to do. Right? And
remember, I need to withhold my opinion until I've had a chance to work on your wording.
Okay, well, let's say what this is the scope.
I'm not going to nod and say it's perfect.
Yeah, so let me see if we can actually, let me take another step.
Good, now that's a good sentence, okay? Value objectives. Yeah, I mean, what I often do in a management meeting at the beginning is say, let's list our critical value objectives. And we could do that right now with all we need is the buzzword, the security or agreement. But what are the top 10 value objectives at the top of this? Okay, and I'm prepared to throw in 5 or 10 ideas right away.
Sure, let's start with that. So I think that's and we have I have another 15 minutes or so. Let's focus on just fleshing out at least the sketch out the high level value objectives. Maybe we won't be able to refine them into actionable ones yet.
No.
Sorry.
It's good enough to get the buzzwords and sort of agree, yeah, it's that kind of stuff we're talking about. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So let's call it a brainstorm of high level objective names. I call them tags.
Objective.
Yeah, name tags, because we don't only have time to identify the okay. If we get a few of these on the table, it'll become more obvious what we're doing. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So the first one, let me brainstorm a few, and then I'll turn it over to you. Okay. Now, empowerment. Transparency. Flexibility. Comprehensiveness. Now, I could do another 10, but I'm going to now, you see what I'm doing? Can I turn it over to you to brainstorm? What am I missing here?
Responsibility.
Good. Full marks for that, as we say in Britain. Your turn, Ernie.
Yeah, so I'll go, just looking at this, I'll say inclusivity. And
good.
Adaptiveness, doesn't have to have the same type of speech.
Yeah, that might be the same as flexibility, and we don't know until we define them, but.
Yeah, we can word cloud them together.
Yeah, I think so. That might be a good idea here.
We can start doing like.
Good. Good. You're on a roll here. Now this is the way I start with real management problems. And executives can deal with it. They know the buzzwords and they're willing to contribute. And then the question is, define them so everybody agrees, and define the goals so everybody agrees the degree of improvement we need.
So,
so I think one that was not on here was measurability. At least that's not obviously in that list. So just so I understand like the process.
Yeah. Okay. I wouldn't put that there. That's a technical characteristic. That's a strategy. That is something that for example, it contributes to transparency. This will give you, it contributes arguably to several of the other ones. But so I would actually put it on, I'll tell you what, let's have a separate list here. Potential strategies. And I think I would argue, and I have to put my argument to you so you finally agree, but that measurability is a means towards those high-level goals. It is not a goal in itself. If we can achieve the other ones beautifully with no measurability, we'd be happy. We don't.
I just realized that what helped me to understand is the scope. Like, these are objectives for what? These are the
excellent point. Yeah, let's write down the scope, and let's call it worldwide datocracy.
Okay, so the goal is datocracy. The scope is defining. Okay, so the scope is okay. Let's put a few different potential scope definitions. So let's. So there's worldwide datocracy.
Something like that, yeah.
No, but you know, another way of putting it is trying to, you know, so there's two different framings that I'm getting stuck on. One is sort of defining datocratic.
Yeah.
Is like coming up with a thing there, and
of course I have done this in my datocracy book.
Right, and you're defining it as a political. So I think that there's two different things there, which is where I think it's worth for me to kind of tease them out to make sure we're talking about the same thing today. Here, right? One is like, what is the imagined end state of a global datocratic political system, right? And that's a big thing. I'm trying to do the small thing. Is what is the sort of core virtues of being datocratic, which you can do even if you're just discussing, you know, an open source pull request, or like in this case, an ASCII document. Like, what is the self-referential virtues that this document possesses that make it datocratic?
I think the central idea is that the individual, the datocrat, feels that they are really empowered and that people aren't stealing power from them.
Right.
Like politicians making deals on the side.
There is a goal for that, but there's a lot of things that are like wealth redistribution and public safety, which are true values to pursue for, but those are not things that the process in itself addresses. And the way it addresses things like, so, this is the thing. Let me this, I think maybe the word, a datocratic process is the thing that I am interested in versus datocratic. And this may be where there's some tension and maybe muddy thinking on my part.
Fine.
I'm trying to define what are the objectives that I would use to measure the quality of the process, which is different than the quality of the result.
Yep, that's right.
And so what,
I have to.
So let me propose that for a data, for what qualifies as a datocratic process.
Right.
Okay.
Now, by the way, what you're saying is there are two different scopes here: the process itself and the results of the process.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And we have to separate these concerns and plan them separately. That is, there will be a set of objectives for the outputs of the process.
Right.
And there will be a separate set of objectives for the datocratic process itself, no matter what it outputs.
Yes.
Now,
so these are two different levels of concern. Sorry.
Yeah, I've been mentioning that I see like not only in the creation process that will have values while we develop process, and then the values of the process of the end result. But Datocracy has two parts. One part is the mechanics, and we have measurability. So for things to work, things have to be measured. That has nothing to do with responsibility or inclusivity, right? So those. I want to make sure that we can then tease out those mechanics and adapt them to anything. And then having Datocracy have the values where we're talking about transparency, right? Some organization might not be Intel is not a transparent organization. They don't want to talk about all the plans, but they want to measure everything. So,
okay, sorry. I realize that you're using words slightly differently than I'm hearing them. So when you say inclusivity, you mean like social inclusivity, right?
Correct.
Right, but I'm saying like, okay, right, and that we ran into this problem beforehand, right? Like, for me, for this process to be inclusive means that the three of us are all heard at the local process level.
Yeah,
which is different than at the outcomes level. You want to make sure that when you roll out this process to others, that it's socially inclusive. And like, it is a real problem. Like the fact that it's also a bunch of techie guys doing this. And
So
there's like
maybe-
a short-term and a long-term tension there, and that's where I'm getting stuck in trying to figure out what it is we're
I
trying
want
to focus on.
I want a word here. These things here, I call them tags. They are simply text strings,
Yeah.
right? They have no meaning except what is formally assigned to them by individuals or groups. That is, you cannot look at that text string and know anything about it except it has a variety of possible interpretations, right? So the next step here is that we take each one of these tags and we define it, like with a scale of measure is a very good start on definition. Every one of these gets a scale. Now we're beginning to define it, and we can agree or disagree about the scale, but we can't have many scales or many different definitions for the same word. It has to be one agreed definition. And what we're doing now is quibbling about your interpretation of the word inclusivity. It's too early to do that. We have not sat down and defined it and agreed on the definition. And we need to do that.
What Ernie wants to say is that the three of us have to participate in the process, and we have to feel, and we have to, the result has to be the work of all three of us. So it's like 100% participation of the members of this thing. That will be I think the definition of what Ernie's saying. Inclusivity.
Well, you get interesting questions there. Like, does it have to be unanimous, or is 2 out of 3 okay? And if the one, but anyway, we have to get into those questions. How do we decide what we agree on is a question as a process question we have to get to.
Yeah.
But that's no different than Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin writing constitutions and stuff like that. They have to work out those pragmatic details.
Right. And so let me see if I can land us in the next 5 minutes. I don't know. So I'm going to propose that this document here, DDA1, the goal is to define the criteria of what makes for a datocratic process or datocratic decision-making process.
Yeah, roughly.
Okay, and as used by us right now, and then we'll try to solve that locally scoped problem first, and then in that context, then I think having the value objectives that define that. So if I can kind of trim that down here. So objectives against, in that case, and again, we're going to focus on process objectives. Let's just kind of group this. So when I certainly see adaptivity and flexibility there. The way I see them, comprehensiveness, empowerment, and inclusivity are related. Do you see them differently?
You cannot even have this discussion without somebody drafting a little bit more text here. You cannot have the discussion.
Okay.
Because we're dealing with stuff in our heads, which we can't see the other people's heads. So we have to write down. I have a process for doing it. It's called language. It's in all my books, right? And we have to write down better definitions of this stuff to even begin to argue with each other.
Okay, good. So what I'm saying is, okay. So then this is the, okay, so this part here is high-level brainstorming is okay. Let me just kind of be self-referential. So first is using name tags for high-level brainstorming of potential objectives. Okay, that's what
By
we've
the
done
way,
here.
I have a little tradition called fuzzy brackets. And what I do is I put the less than and greater than symbol around a word saying, this has not been defined. We acknowledge it has not been defined. And until it's been defined, we can't really argue about it. Fuzzy brackets. So we could put symbolically at least fuzzy brackets from the beginning, around every word or around the set of words saying, we are acknowledging right now to anybody reading it, this is not defined. It is not agreed. It's a draft to start getting going in a minimal format in the time we had available.
Okay, so the idea is that, okay, so step one is
good. You're doing it.
Okay.
You got it.
Okay.
It's terrible. It signals to anybody reading, hey, didn't you see those fuzzy brackets? That was our way of saying we have not defined this. We agree with you.
Okay.
So we have to do the work of defining, then we can argue about that definition.
Okay. So we're not going to try and solve everything. Let me see if at least the first three sentences define the scope of what we think this document's going to do. Are we okay with that so far? At least as well as those words?
As I said, I sort of refuse to commit until I've had a chance to think about it.
Okay, fair enough. But I think the point is that's interesting to me is that that's the, okay, so let's start there. And then step two, let's just get the rest of the steps done and then we'll call it a day. So step two is volunteers, or everyone tries to define the terms they care about.
By the way, I have a second stage there. I'll put a name on it. I write down approximately a sentence called an ambition level, like make everybody feel the system is completely transparent. It's a little bit more than just transparency. I'm making people feel, right, that they feel it is transparent. So, so a good second, right after the tag, I do the ambition level. This is what executives and top people do. They spout a motivational, nice sounding thing. You can pick them up all
okay,
over.
so that's good because the word ambition level with an example is a lot more clear. Like so
yeah, that's a formal thing.
So that would be for like would that be like associated with one of those name tags?
Yeah, you take one of the name tags and you write down its ambition level. And I gave an example for transparency. Make everybody feel the system is transparent and not fooling them. Something like that.
Make everybody feel. We're talking about feelings.
Yeah, I was.
How do you measure that? I mean, what's the quantification?
Survey.
I can do that, Ernest. I'll give you a challenge. Google that, and you will find 100,000 answers.
Well, but
that's what marketing people do all the time. How people feel about a product or service.
Okay, so we have to pick one, right?
Right. But I mean, like, yeah. So at this stage, we have an ambition level, which is vague, and then at the end, we will have a concrete numerical mechanism for measuring it. Right?
I often call it the management bullshit level, but I do capture it anyway for various reasons, which I don't have time to get into. I'll tell you what stage 3 is to just be a bit dramatic.
Sure.
Definition of scale of measure. Then now we're really diving in and pinning it down in a disciplined way.
So you're saying, let me just understand, is that we have like a high level hashtag, and then we have sort of an English, sort of informal
bullshit level
or informal.
Informal, that's right.
Yeah, informal.
And those are floating around all the time. They're always floating around.
Right, and then we have a formal let's call it informal description of what what achieving that objective looks like, right?
Yeah.
I think that's important, is that it's not just defining the term, it's defining what the result is that you're going for.
Yes, ambition level.
Okay, that's actually really useful because that is actually a really critical missing piece that I think you said before a couple of times, but I had to lock it down to be clear about it.
Surprisingly useful and valuable. I can tell you that right away. Now, by the way, because we're running out of time, this definition of scale of measure, I have a book I can give you called Quantiering, Quantification. And it describes how to develop that scale of measure when you don't know how to do it and you're like Ernest and saying, but you can't do feelings. And I'm telling you how to do it in practice right away. So we can give that book away, or you can take a look at it. Just remind me to, but I've put it on LinkedIn as a free giveaway. But actually, well, we won't get into that, but I will make a free copy available for anybody working with us. Quantiering. That is a little handbook describing exactly how to do this scale of measure when you don't know how.
Let's not waste time. Yeah, I would like to get a copy of this book. So
it's on its way.
Okay.
All right. Just to, we got to wrap up in 2 minutes. Just so I'm clear, are there any other steps to creating a value objective that are essential?
Yes, but we don't have time. But I'll give you one: the goal level on the scale. That tells you how far we want to go. That's the level. So after scale, I'm simplifying a lot because of time. Yeah. There is more, but we need a goal there on the scale. The 95% we want to have in some time frame.
So desired and possibly current.
Pardon?
Desired and sometimes current should be in there too, right?
Yeah. So call it what you like. There's a lot more I can say about it, and I do in writing. That's what that quantiering book is all about. There's plenty there, but yeah, the scale is something we reuse for a very wide variety of purposes and levels, but one of them is our primary goal.
Okay, this is good, and I know that
you've done that. You've got a very clear statement, right?
Right, this is good. So I feel like you've obviously said all these things before, but it's really helpful to me to have a concrete instance to like pound my head against so that I'm internalizing what you're trying to say and trying to put it into a simple documented format that I can do again in the future without having to read the whole book. All right. I'm good. I gotta run soon, but I want to leave it open for final comments.
Yeah. Before we go, it is important that we're going to have this document to show, our result. But it is also important that we keep this. That we document how the document has evolved. I know we will have GIFs and all that, but we should keep these videos as the main document.
These are all live broadcast and archived on YouTube, so people have the founding documents and process, right? So we are, and that's like a value there somewhere about transparency that I need to think about how to define that in a way that gets us further. All right, so I've got a lot of crazy stuff going on next week. I don't know how much time I will have, but I will try to get at least some light editing done on this before next Friday's meeting. And we'll check in next Friday morning to see if we have enough progress to.
Okay. Would you tell me when you want to turn me loose? You do whatever you want, but at some point say, okay, Tom, I'm turning it over to you. Do whatever you want to do.
Okay, I think what I'll do is I'll probably try to, yes, I think that's fair. I should have a document that I think internalizes my current understanding of what the good thing that you're trying to get us to do, so that you can give me a meaningful critique of it. And then I'll try and let you know when I will let you know when I have that. And hopefully if it's before next Friday, you'll have some time. And if it's not, then we will reevaluate Friday where it makes sense.
I appreciate 24 hours to tackle things.
I'm going to make that note about 24 hours advance notice as being a measure somewhere. All right, Ernest, any last comments from you?
I will go over that document, and what my main principle, one of those, is that we create a language that is understandable by machines. I want this document to be able to, or that we can have a system that can read through this document and understand what's going on. Not your AI with using, a bunch of calculus and equations to come up with something and not knowing how we got to that end result.
All right, I added hashtag intelligibility.
Yeah, and so I wanted
intelligible.
Yeah, like language. I wanted this to extend it to a programming language, a understandable a language of knowledge, all that, so that everybody and everything, everything that has the ability to process things can understand. It's our PMI person.
Ernest, we're going to be really good friends. I agree 100%. That is the primary purpose and direction of my planning language. Everybody can understand very well.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
you're gonna like it the more you learn it.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks everyone. It's been great
Thank you.
talking with you. Glad we can meet up again. Hopefully we can do this again next Friday with even more concrete